Shalom and welcome again to Secrets of Meaning, the podcast arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. Thank you very, very much for joining us. As you know, we hope to explore aspects of the revolution in longevity that we are encountering as a Jewish community, not only here, but worldwide. If you'd like to connect with us, please feel free to email me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. Check out the website, jewishsacredaging.com, and as well as the Facebook page. And you know how to work Facebook. If not, ask a 12-year-old because they know everything when it comes to this. We are very, very pleased to welcome to the Secrets of Meaning today, Dr. Benjamin Corn, the founding director of the Institute for the Study of Hope, Dignity, and Well-Being in Israel, based out of the Hebrew University. And Dr. Corn, Ben, welcome. Thank you very, very much for joining us. You are home in Israel, correct, today?
That's correct. And it's a pleasure to be with you. Shalom to all of your listeners.
Well, thank you. Well, as we say here in New Jersey, Baruch haba. And you have roots here in southern New Jersey and Philadelphia area, and hopefully even went to a couple of Phillies or Eagles games when you were here. So
yeah, but I rooted against them because I'm a New Yorker.
I know. I didn't want to go there. I did not want to go there. I just wanted to leave it live there.
In New York, we don't win anything anymore. So the only passion I had was rooting against the Eagles and against the Sixers. That's how it works.
Well, now that we've established those ground rules, that's a perfect segue into an Institute for Hope, Dignity, and Well-Being. This is a fascinating subject, and I really am very, very pleased that you're willing to join us. What is this Institute for the Study of Hope, Dignity, and Well-Being? Give us a little bit of a history, because this is brand new. This is real new on the scene in Israel. Talk to us about how it began. What was the genesis? What do you hope to do with this?
Right. So first of all, thanks again for hosting me and for letting me discuss some of these issues which are so close to my heart. I'm a physician and oncologist by training, and I observed that the bond among almost all of my patients was a desire for hopefulness. In other words, that was sort of the neutralizing force, the thread that was common, because I would deal with patients with varying prognoses. People look at cancer as one term, but it's really not. It's a diversity of disease. And yet all of them were clinging to something to hope for. It could be hoping for cure. It could be hoping for relief of symptoms. It could be hoping for non-medical goals. And we'll discuss that in a moment. But it seemed to me that I was being called upon to help them become more hopeful. And the them is not just the patients, it's also the family members. And as you said, I'm fortunate to have immigrated to Israel, made Aliyah almost 30 years ago now. And as most of us know, it's been a pretty difficult last couple of years. And hope has become the word of the years, not just the year. It's sort of what everyone is speaking about. And, the great American author and humorist Mark Twain once observed about the climate. Well, not even that. He said, everyone's talking about the weather and no one's doing anything about it. And it seems to me that a paraphrase can be developed about hope. All Israelis right now are speaking about hope, but how do we become hopeful? And it's quite the challenge. And it's a challenge. Let me just give you a tiny little sprinkle of hope theory. Hope, on the one hand, is this sort of grand, romantic, maybe amorphous idea. And I'm certainly the last one who wants to argue against romance. However, there's also a way to define hope. And we know that because of the work that was done by a thought-leading professor of psychology at the University of Kansas in the early 1990s named Dr. Charles Rick Snyder. And he spent a sabbatical year interviewing people who were identified as hopeful individuals in the community around the city of Lawrence, where he lived. And after recording and transcribing these interviews, he understood there were three components to almost everyone's hopefulness. And they were, first of all, a goal, but not just any goal, a goal which was meaningful to that person and which was plausible, which could actually be achieved. So for instance, I always use the example, if you ask me when I was a kid or even ask me now when I'm not a kid, what my goal is, it would be, and I mean this, to play in the NBA. That's my goal. Now we're, doing this by video, so you can't really see, but you can even get a sense on the screen here that that is not a plausible opportunity. Now, it would be meaningful, both from the point of view of the entertainment I could provide and presumably all of the work I could do as a benefactor with the money I'd be making, but I couldn't pull it off. Secondly, you need a pathway to get to those goals. And Snyder understood that the pathway was going to be studded with obstacles. We weren't born yesterday. We know that the pathway always twists and turns and has all sorts of hurdles that I have to mount. So there are these external obstacles. It could be somebody who's competitive with me that wants to block me from achieving a goal, or it could be what Snyder called an internal obstacle. Those are the demons within, like anger and jealousy and fear. So when it came to the external obstacles, Snyder said you have to find a way to circumnavigate them, figure out a workaround. For the internal obstacles, he said you have to find a way to dance with them. Finally, the third component after goals and pathways is the idea of agency. It's a very fancy word. I didn't know what it meant when I first read his work, but it's basically the drive, the motivation to set out on those pathways. So goals, pathways, agencies, GPA, just like in college. That's what you need. And in these times, in Israel in particular, I think it was very hard for people to marshal agency. Where is it coming from? Where's my get up and go when I feel that I have no control, that nothing is in my hands? Well, we have some solutions to that. And not only did I want to, and by the way, the organization is called LifeStore, and the, as you said, the institute was co-founded with the Hebrew University in Jerusalem and with LifeStore, and along with my wife and partner Dvora. And we think we had a lot to contribute, and we're interested in what we call the science of hope. How do we make people more hopeful? And what are the characteristics of people who have sort of a head start when it comes to hopefulness? And what are some of the differences of the terms that we throw around, like hope and optimism? So we wanted to be able to start formally looking at that, not just doing it for fun, as was going on for about 10 years, but to really tighten up our boots and to continue with the lower extremity metaphor, and to hold our feet to the fire to be able to measure our outcomes. Let me stop there and see what questions might have emerged for you.
In your understanding, and there is as you just mentioned, it said it triggered something. Is there a predisposition in your understanding, a genetic predisposition for people to hope? Is there a hope gene?
I don't know if we found a gene yet, but there definitely are people who are inherently more hopeful than others. I, by the way, am one of the inherently less hopeful people, or certainly less optimistic people.
Welcome to the club.
The beauty of hope is that we can distinguish it from optimism. And let me take a moment to do that. Okay? When I ask people who participate in our seminars to conjure up sort of a metaphor for hope in their mind's eye, the most common answer I get, and you've heard it all the time, and here's an example, is this: the glass half full. Okay?
Right.
That's what people discuss. Well, it turns out the glass half full is not really the metaphor for hope. It's the metaphor for optimism. In fact, the optimist sees the glass not only half full, he or she sees the glass half full with cherry soda. And we all know these people. You might be one of these people. I don't know you well enough. Sometimes,
no, believe me, I'm not.
Oh, okay. Oh, I was wondering why we were getting along so well.
No, we're
yeah. So
another story for another time. Go ahead.
No, absolutely. But the bottom line is, there are optimists in our midst. Almost 15% of the population answers to that descriptor. Sometimes it's inspiring. Sometimes it can get on your nerves, certain people, and people might even say, well, that felt like pathological optimism. So I don't know if it's pathological or not. I'm not here to judge. but I can tell you it's congenital optimism. In other words, optimism is something you either have or you don't. You are born with that. What the gene is, I don't quite know, but that's not something I can teach you. Hope is something that I can pass on to you as a skill, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, in a moment. So optimism is the trait. Hope is the state. Hope interests me more because A, I can leverage it, and B, I can very easily measure it. And if I'm trying to enhance someone's hopefulness, and I believe I have tools to do that, and we in the organization have developed those tools with the help of other really brilliant colleagues, then I want to know if I was successful in doing that or not. And the second thing Snyder did, besides creating this operationalization of hope, in other words, when you check those three boxes, goals, pathways, agencies, what he would say is the feeling that descends upon you will be identifiable as hope. In other words, if we were sitting around a table and we had time, which we never do, you define hope one way, I would define it another way. I believe both of it would have goals, pathways, and agency in there. But just like chocolate pudding tastes a certain way to you and a certain way to me, but both of us know when we've tasted it, it's kind of that feeling. And when you answer to those criteria of GP and A, that's when you'll say, wow, I'm feeling more hopeful. And there are all sorts of things we want to study in there. One of the beauties of this institute is, we want to create a legacy. So we're very interested in trying to involve younger scientists who want to ask questions about hope, big questions and small questions. We've created fellowship and scholarship opportunities to provide some funding for these people. And we have every year one fellow and one scholar, one based in the US, one based in Israel. And each of them take on a project under our mentorship, which, we help them cultivate and bring to fruition as a scientific paper to be able to draw some conclusions. And hopefully that will spawn other ideas. So we're very, very excited about that. And if I can sneak in one more little point about it, one other thing which has been remarkable to us is right now we have over 25 partners abroad, mostly in the US, a few in Europe, also in South Africa and Japan. And let's be honest, these past 25, 26 months have been very challenging for Israeli academics. And yet, even though nearly a little bit less than a third of my partners at these varying institutions are Muslim, no one has renounced the partnership with us. Everyone continues to interact with us. Everyone meets with us on a regular basis. And I think it's a testimony not to my personality or to the personalities of these people, though they're wonderful people, but rather to the power of this thing called hope and our desire to want to do the deep dive to understand it better. And we have maintained every single one of these relationships. There's been no boycott, no ban, nothing. It's just been fruitful.
So again, we're speaking with Dr. Benjamin Corn, the founding director of the Institute for the Study of Hope, Dignity, and Well-Being out of Israel. Dr. Corn, you mentioned partnerships and tentacles around the world. Suppose somebody wants to say, okay, I would really like to learn more about this. I want to even perhaps connect with this institute. How does one do it? What's the website? What's the means of doing that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd be delighted to stay connected with any of your listeners and viewers. And they would just go, our organization is called Life's Door. So the website is lifesdoor.org, LAFESDOOR.org. The way and they'll get access to us right away, and they'll be responded to immediately. And we, by the way, do in a moment, maybe we can even now talk about some of our tools for enhancing hope. We use mostly a workshop mechanism. It used to be an in-person workshop done in a very intimate environment. We still run those, and I love doing them. But, we understood there was this need, and to be able to have scalability, in COVID, we very quickly moved it to a virtual platform. And we've since developed a smartphone app, which now is embedded with all sorts of nice AI features, which make it very easy to use and really a lot of fun. And in other words, what used to be a paper and pencil exercise when people would come into the room and we would identify a goal together and think about the paths and the obstacles and try to troubleshoot them, and then do even what we call a mental rehearsal to try and understand how to become more agentic and more motivated. We found that we can very seamlessly transfer all of that to usually a Zoom platform. We actually have data on that showing that we have excellent satisfaction and results when we do it, that there really is no drop off from the live in-person variant of that. So we do it all the time. And, it's such a kick, as you know, too, because in one day I could be here in Israel and the next day I can be in Tokyo and the next day in London. And that's really what our life is right now. And why not? Yeah.
So let me ask the question. Could you just trigger something else? I mean, suppose there's a colleague of ours maybe sitting there watching this, listening to this and say, something, this is something I'd like to bring to my congregation. We talk about hope. There's the Aleinu in every service. This is a prayer that is messianic. It's a hope prayer towards the end of the service. Could this workshop or session that you're talking about on Zoom, could it be if I'm the rabbi of a congregation someplace and I wanted to adapt this to my congregation, would the Institute be able to, would it be willing to work with a congregational entity to bring this information to them?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, one of the things we're most interested in now is taking it to the next level. In other words, most of Snyder's work and the work of his protégés was focused on the individual. But right now we feel that's just not enough. What about communal hopes? What about national hopes? I think this needs to come into play. Now, I assume that the same principles pertain, that I have to think about a goal and a pathway and an agency. It could be a community, let's say, that, I lived in a neighborhood once where there was a problem with trash pickup. And this sounds minor, but it really wasn't. It got on everyone's nerves. And even though there was a government responsibility, we had to together be civic-minded and establish that as a goal and delegate responsibilities and figure out how we were going to do that. In other words, there was a goal, there was a pathway. Monday I was going to patrol the neighborhood. Tuesday, my neighbor was doing it. And the agency, the drive, was because we didn't want to live in filth. And we were disappointed by our politicians. And, it's an amazing thing how your agency can come from a variety of sources. The ultimate, I use sports metaphors all the time, and I apologize, but
please don't. Please don't.
Oh. The most agentic person I can think about in my life is Michael Jordan, who I think, I know there's this debate that's always raging, but who was the greatest? To me, it's hands down, it's Jordan. And it really is because he always could find the way to get himself out there and to play at his top performance. It could be to the point because somebody said, Jordan, you're not as good as you think you are. And he said, I'm going to show you I'm much better than you think I am. Or it could be there was this guy who was compared to him. And people would say, thinking that this would endear them to Jordan, they would say, there's this guy, Clyde Drexler, and he has a game that's like yours. He patterns himself after you. And Jordan would say, he's not even close to me. Why are you making such a comparison? So he could use anything to be his agency. And agency is changing all the time. I read one. There's an interview in the New York Times yesterday with Novak Djokovic, arguably the greatest tennis player of all time. And he said his goals have changed throughout. That when he started, he just wanted to win more and more Grand Slams and prove that he was better than Federer and Nadal. And he said, as of now, the reason he goes out there to play is because he wants his children to see him. And he now sees his agency coming more from his family internally as an outgrowth of his love for them and trying to create a legacy for his kids, and not for his need to prove that he can overcome all of his professional competitors. That's an amazing thing. Within one person in a 20-year lifespan, he has changed his primary motivational tool.
Well, I would submit to working in Jewish Sacred Aging, our program, those goals change as we get older. And the impact of legacy, whether it's, building the career and building the family. But when you're in your 70s and 80s, the goal may change to a variety of different ways, having more to do with the impact of impending mortality, I think. And there's not an original thought by any stretch of the imagination. But I think that the idea that the goals themselves are flexible as we grow older, as we change, and sometimes external circumstances may force a change in that goal.
That's right. So one of Snyder's main points right from the get-go was that hope is dynamic. And it has to be dynamic because there's a dynamism in our lives. So on the micro level, with patients diagnosed with cancer, I saw it all the time. On a given day, they had a certain potential and a certain set of abilities. And then if they weren't doing so well, there would be a deterioration of those abilities, but that didn't mean we couldn't find other goals. So there's a concept of re-goaling. It's very much like recalibrating with a GPS. And we'd have to say, okay, given where we are now and our understanding that we're not in the same place we were yesterday, let's think again about what our goals are. And that, by the way, is one of the great antidotes for me as a physician. My colleagues are always complaining, this can get so mundane, so routine. I think it never gets routine if we always maintain this fascination, this curiosity with this patient that's in front of us, because that patient, he or she, represents such a diverse palette of interesting features, and it's just a matter of us getting to know them. And now, as a physician, I have this privilege, I know that's a controversial word, of people letting me into their world and divulging so much to me. But all of us really have that opportunity with friends and family if we want to avail ourselves of it. And I think it's just a great way. I tell this to people in our workshops all the time. Go out on Sunday morning and have coffee with your buddy and say to them, what are your goals? And, what's making your day right now? And it's just a fascinating thing.
Yes. So speaking of these goals and the dynamism of it, I have to ask you this question, whether the Institute for the Study of Hope, Dignity, and Well-Being has begun to walk into this ballpark or not yet. And that is the role of faith, or spirituality, whatever word you want to use for it, as a component of generating hope, because, there are certain religious traditions, we're one of them, Hatikva, that says, no matter how bad, there's always hope. We're going to wait. We hope. So have you started to do studies about the role of faith, religion, spirituality in this?
We just published a paper in the beginning of November that took a large population of patients with lung cancer, and we looked for a variety of factors that could predict who would be more hopeful. And it turned out those who self-identified as religious people were significantly more hopeful, especially in terms of the pathways piece, than those who didn't identify as religious. Now, that's very interesting, in particular because pathways probably reflects, the rituals that a religious person can avail themselves of. But it's not to say that someone who's not religious, who is spiritual but not religious, likewise isn't more hopeful. I don't know that. That's something we're starting to explore right now, as you suggest. But Snyder himself postulated in the early 1990s that if you go back to fourth grade, I hope this isn't conjuring up bad memories for any listeners, but back in fourth grade, you did the Venn diagrams. And so he argued there's probably quite a bit of overlap of the two circles of hope and faith, because both of them require a certain belief system that exists in the absence of factual material. So there's a certain willingness of the faith-based person to accept things and to take a leap of faith or maybe a leap of hope. But as I said, we're very interested in seeing now if someone who defines themselves as spiritual but not religious is more hopeful. Another point I want to make is there's definitely a social component to hopefulness. Hope is augmented by social interaction.
Is it
And
contagious?
so we'll get to that in 1 second. That's a
Okay.
great question. And when you're faith-based, when you're, as we say, churched, you usually have a community that comes along with that. So, right now I'm actually recovering from an illness. So everyone in my community knows about it. And I'm getting calls every day and people want to recite Psalms for me. And it's like very uplifting. I mean, it makes me very hopeful. So that's one thing. Hope contagion, that's really interesting too. I mentioned to you, we have a fellow and a scholar. So our Hope Scholar is looking exactly at that, at whether or not we can document hope contagion. In other words, there are a variety of things that answer to the moniker of social contagion. I'll give you a few. Yawning, laughter. The reason that they use laugh tracks in sitcoms, even like Seinfeld, which is a very funny show to begin with and probably didn't need it, but it's because when you hear somebody laughing and applauding, that makes you want to do the same thing. There's a contagion to that. And we think it's very much the same with hope. And so we've developed a model to study that as well. But no one's ever proven that. But it's really, you have a very good intuition for hope and the questions related to it.
The concept of family of origin, you kind of like alluded to it, and I want to come back to it before we start running out of time. Whether there's not a genetic component of this, but the impact of a family of origin upon how you teach a young person as they're growing up in the family system to look at the world. Have you studied that?
We haven't studied that formally. However, well, I'll take a step back by saying, there's a happiness index, which is conducted every year, and Israel does remarkably well in that, even during the tough times. And we believe that a lot of that has to do with dimensions of hope, which are built into the happiness index. In fact, we just a couple of months ago did a survey using a hope index. We're doing a re-challenge now that the hostages have been released to see if there's been, a shift based on that. But I think I think hope really is in Jewish DNA and in Jewish teaching. I think it really is one of the gifts of the Jews because, first of all, as you've heard from this dialogue during the last half an hour, hope is very future-oriented. And that idea, if anyone's read Cale's book, The Gift of the Jews, he talks about how the Jews really introduced, thinking about the future into the world. That was really one of their gifts, one of the gifts of our heritage. And I think that's very much a part of it, that what we now call hope and resilience, that's probably a lot of the upbringing that, you and I got and many of your listeners received. We might not have used those labels. And by the way, I'm not so concerned about the semantics. You can really call it what you want. I'm concerned about trying to make sure that we spread this thing, or make sure that I think I have a moral duty, if I can, to make someone more hopeful. Certainly the people that work with me, the people I love, the people I live with, I believe that's part of my human experience, and I feel that's very much embedded to the way many of us have grown up. And I think it's a great thing if we could pass it forward. And I've had many students tell me, "Well, I didn't learn that much medicine from you, but I certainly learned a lot about a worldview." And I think I took that as a compliment.
No, you should. As the institute expands, the institute is a year old. It's
a little bit less than a year old. That's right.
Okay. How do you? And you're based in Israel, but the need for a community of hope is so overwhelming, especially in the United States. Are you planning to do more work in the United States, and or are you available for like guest lectureships, scholar in residence things when you come to the States? And if so,
absolutely.
how does somebody get just the website?
Yeah, that'd be the easiest way. But I was just in San Francisco at UC San Francisco. We did workshops there with a fascinating program in what's now called survivorship. People who, do well with their cancer therapy, and we're trying to help them become more hopeful, as well as the staff, because burnout is a problem. And I think you can make the argument that hope is sort of the antidote to burnout. We're going to be in Tucson, Arizona in February to give a lecture at the University of Arizona, the Cindy Wool lecture. And we do that all the time. And we'd love to just develop and maintain connections with your listeners. It would mean a lot to us. And since you brought it up, I'll shamelessly say, but we're actually looking for a naming opportunity for the center. If there is someone in the philanthropic world who would like to hear more about it and what we want to do with the programmatics, if maybe he or she would be interested in lending their name to the Institute itself. We're very interested in all of those things.
I just want to make sure that people understand this is you're a physician. The workshops you just alluded to in San Francisco had to do with cancer. But this idea of hope, dignity, and well-being is not specific to the medical world. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. And I'm really glad you are helping me to veer back to my message. But it's hard to get the MD out of your system.
I understand.
All those years of listening to my mother. Anyway.
Family of origin, man. Family of origin.
There you go. But no, absolutely. And we see it even more so in the last 2 years. We look at hope as a social technology. And frankly, most of our time right now is dealing with the trauma that's blanketed this country. My wife did an interview and she said there's a tsunami of trauma that's on its way. And she's absolutely right. And we're trying to, reach out to different organizations, communal organizations. It could be like the equivalent of a JCC in community by community, and transferring these tools to help them understand that this might not be the antidote to trauma, but we believe it's one of the pieces. And we've been called upon by the educational system, by the welfare system, by the prison system, where it becomes very difficult for those who are released from the jails to reintegrate into society. And we believe that these techniques can help them. So we think we have a lot to offer across a variety of strata in society. And we're very interested in pursuing that, very interested in measuring that. And by the way, one of the great enablers for us over the past 6 months, I just want to say, is working with President Herzog here in Israel, who has taken an interest in this. We actually launched the center in Beit Tennessee in the president's residence, and he has, as I said, opened many doors for us because he has bought into this idea.
So real fast, the video with President Herzog and you and the launch, that's on YouTube. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Anyone could see it.
And so I imagine that when they go to the YouTube thingy and put in Institute for the Study of Hope.
Yeah, launch. And in fact, there's also an interview very briefly with Rachel Goldberg-Polin, who is, now the poet laureate of the Jewish people. And she gives her interpretation of hopefulness. And it's really, every time I listen to it, I get chills.
And the website, again, for people who want to follow up.
Lifestore.org.
LIFESDOOR.
The name, by the way, came because remember the Dylan song or the Guns N' Roses cover, Knocking on Heaven's Door. So we said, why do you have to knock on Heaven's Door? Let's knock on Life's door. And we think hope is the key to open that door.
Dr. Benjamin Corn, the founding director of the Institute for the Study of Hope, Dignity, and Well-Being. First of all, refuah shlema.
Thank you.
Second of all, Wilt Chamberlain would have destroyed Michael Jordan. And I just wish you just health, peace, long life, and success with Institute. And let us know how Jewish Sacred Aging can be of help. And thank you very, very much for your time. And
I'm very grateful to have met you. And I will also start listening and following you.
Thank you very much. Take care, Ben. Thank you very, very much.
Right now.
To all of you, thank you very much for joining us today on today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. We very, very much appreciate your time and your interest. Please follow up at the website, jewishsacredaging.com. And if you'd like to help us continue these podcasts and programs, on the website, there's a very conveniently located donate button. All you have to do is click on it, follow the prompts, and we're very, very grateful. Seekers of Meaning is produced at the Broadcast Center of Lubetkin Media here in beautiful Bucolic,